Imagine opening a sealed, completely undisturbed ancient vault in medieval Europe.
Okay.
And sitting right there in the dust is like a modern brand of Japanese snacks.
Right, just completely out of place.
Exactly. It shatters your entire understanding of timelines, of geography.
Oh, absolutely.
Of what human beings were capable of doing and, when they were capable of doing it.
Yeah, that profound cognitive dissonance. It's exactly what researchers experienced when they started digging into the ancient ash of a remote Polynesian island.
And found something that absolutely categorically should not have been there.
It's the kind of archaeological anomaly that forces you to just throw out the textbooks and start from scratch.
You really have to.
Because when the physical evidence simply refuses to align with the accepted historical narrative, you have to rethink the entire map of human migration.
And that is the exact map we are unrolling today. So if you are joining us right now, I invite you to just, settle in.
Yeah, get comfortable.
We're going to take our time with this one. Whether you are winding down for the evening, looking to escape the noise of the day, or just wanting to immerse yourself in a genuinely baffling historical mystery, you are in the exact right place.
There really is something incredibly calming about stepping back from the immediate present.
Right.
Just getting lost in a puzzle that is centuries old.
It's the best way to relax. And before we dive into that ancient vault, I want to introduce today's partner, the YouTube channel Decoding the Dark.
A fantastic channel.
Truly. If you enjoy this feeling, winding down while exploring the fascinating shadows of history, the unexplained phenomena, and the deep mysteries of our world, you really have to check them out.
Highly recommended.
Take a moment later to go watch Decoding the Dark on YouTube, leave a like, and subscribe. It supports them, it supports us, and it basically guarantees you'll have a constant stream of incredible, mysterious content to relax with.
It's a perfect pairing for the narrative we are looking at today, because the shadows over this particular island are long.
Very long.
And they've been deeply misunderstood for generations.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into the incredibly remote, profoundly mysterious island of Rapa Nui, commonly known as Easter Island.
Right.
And to do this properly, to actually understand what happened there, we have pulled together an incredible stack of sources.
We aren't just looking at old explorer logs here.
No, not at all. We have cutting-edge radiocarbon dating studies from the University of Bologna, groundbreaking genetic research published in the journal Nature, deep environmental sediment core analyses.
And some recent, highly complex archival work out of Columbia University.
Yeah. We're pulling from genomics, paleobotany, linguistics, modern institutional ethics.
It's really the only way to get a complete picture. You can't just look at the statues.
Right.
You have to look at the soil, the DNA, the wood.
The mission for this deep dive is to gently untangle a very specific web of myths. Because for decades, the story of Rapa Nui has been told as this, dark cautionary tale.
The ecocide theory.
Exactly. A society that recklessly cut down all its trees to build giant floating stone heads and then just starved to death in the ruins of its own hubris.
Which is such a pervasive idea.
It really is. But we are going to completely dismantle that narrative today.
Step by step.
Instead, we're looking at an awe-inspiring story of human ingenuity, brilliant ecological survival, and a few enigmas that still completely defy explanation today.
And to really grasp the scale of the mystery, we have to start with the sheer, improbable miracle of anyone finding this place to begin with.
Right, because I was looking at the geographic coordinates, and my brain almost rejected the numbers.
It's intensely isolated.
It really is. Rapa Nui is situated in the southeastern Pacific. It is 3,700 kilometers west of mainland Chile.
Which is a massive distance.
And on the other side, it's over 2,000 kilometers from the nearest populated Polynesian islands.
Yeah, it is essentially a single massive volcano rising over 10,000 feet from the ocean floor.
But only a tiny sliver of it actually breaks the surface, right?
Exactly. Only about 163 square kilometers breaks the surface of the water. It is the easternmost point of the Polynesian Triangle.
Just a tiny speck in an expansive blue.
A blue so vast it's difficult to even conceptualize. And yet, the most refined radiocarbon dates we have place the first Polynesian settlement right on the sandy cove of Anaquina.
And that was, what, between AD 1200 and 1253?
That's right, led by the navigator chief Hotu Matua, according to the oral traditions.
And I think there is a misconception that early island colonization was just people getting blown off course in a storm and washing up on a beach.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right. When you look at the archaeological record, this was a highly calculated, deliberate colonization effort They brought what are known as canoe plants.
That's a really crucial detail. They were effectively packing a terraforming kit in the hulls of those double-hulled canoes.
Oh, I like that phrasing, a terraforming kit.
Yeah, they didn't just hope to find food, they brought the foundational elements of an agricultural ecosystem with them.
Like taro, bananas, sugarcane.
Exactly. And they also brought animals, specifically the Polynesian rat, Rattus excellens.
Which was a reliable, storable protein source during those long voyages.
Right. But this is where we hit that Japanese snacks in a medieval vault moment that you mentioned.
Yes, the anomaly.
Because among the remnants of the plants they cultivated in ancient Polynesia, researchers found evidence of the sweet potato, Ipomoea batatas, and the bottle gourd.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I'm assuming the issue here is that neither of those plants evolved anywhere near the Pacific Islands.
Not even close. The sweet potato is strictly native to South America.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a domesticate of the Andean and coastal regions of that continent. For a long time, the academic consensus, which was largely driven by Western assumptions about indigenous maritime capabilities.
Assuming they couldn't possibly sail that far.
Exactly. The idea was that the Pacific Ocean was a massive, impenetrable barrier, that humans simply couldn't cross from Polynesia to South America and back.
So how did academics explain the sweet potato before they accepted the idea of transoceanic voyaging?
Well, they struggled with it.
Were they proposing that seeds just, floated across thousands of miles of salt water? Or that birds carried them?
Both of those theories were seriously debated. But the sweet potato doesn't propagate well via seeds floating in salt water.
It just rots, right?
Exactly, it rots. It usually requires human cultivation of the tubers. So this biological reality fueled a massive debate.
I can imagine.
Did the Polynesians, who we know were master navigators using the stars and ocean swells, sail all the way to the South American coast, acquire the plant, and sail back?
Or did native South Americans build rafts and drift westward into the Pacific?
Right, which was Thor Heyerdahl's entire obsession.
The Kon-Tiki expedition in 1947.
Yes, exactly. He built a balsa wood raft in Peru and basically let the ocean currents carry him to Polynesia.
Just to prove it was mechanically possible for South Americans to have settled the Pacific.
And he proved that a raft could survive the journey on the prevailing westward currents, which was an incredible feat.
But his broader theory didn't hold up, did it?
No, his broader anthropological theory that Polynesia was settled primarily from South America was largely rejected.
Because the linguistic and archaeological evidence overwhelmingly points to a Southeast Asian origin for the Polynesian people.
Precisely. However, the sweet potato remained a stubborn anomaly.
But we don't have to rely on botanical guesswork or balsa wraps anymore?
No, we don't.
Because the 2020 study in the journal Nature completely blew the doors off this mystery.
It really did.
They didn't look at plants, they looked at human DNA.
They conducted a massive, high-resolution genomic analysis of contemporary populations across several Polynesian islands, including Rapa Nui.
And what exactly were they looking for?
They were looking for specific markers, what geneticists call identical by descent tracks.
Basically segments of DNA that are shared between different populations.
Right, which indicate a common ancestor.
And when they looked at the Rapa Nui genome, they didn't just find Polynesian markers.
No.
They found Native American genetic ancestry, about 10% of it.
And the precision of modern genomics is just stunning. They didn't just find generic South American markers.
They found a specific match.
Yes, they were able to match the genetic signature specifically to the contemporary Xenu people.
Who are an indigenous group living on the Pacific coast of Colombia. That is wild.
It really is.
But, how do you know that didn't happen in the 1800s, after European ships were already crisscrossing the Pacific, moving people around as laborers or sailors?
That's a great question, and that's where the length of those identical by descent tracks comes in.
Oh, interesting.
Over generations, through a process called recombination, segments of DNA inherited from an ancestor get chopped up into smaller and smaller pieces.
So the older the connection, the shorter the pieces.
Exactly. By measuring the length of these unbroken tracks of Native American DNA in the modern Rapa Nui genome, geneticists can mathematically calculate how many generations ago that DNA was introduced.
So they can literally build a biological clock to time the exact moment of contact.
Yes. And that clock points to a very specific window. An admixture event, meaning the moment these two populations met and interbred, between 1150 and 1230 CE.
1150 CE. That is centuries before Columbus.
Centuries?
Centuries before Magellan, long before any European explorer had a concept of the Pacific Ocean.
It proves definitively that the ocean was not a barrier, It was a superhighway.
Wow.
The Xenu people were known for their sophisticated maritime culture and extensive trading networks along the coast.
So whether the Polynesian navigators sailed east, made landfall in Colombia, and returned with Xenu individuals and sweet potatoes,
Or whether Xenu seafarers sailed west and integrated into Polynesian society.
the fact remains, two entirely distinct human lineages met in the middle of the vast Pacific, shared their knowledge, shared their crops, and merged their families.
It's such a profound thought to wind down with.
It really is. The level of skill, the sheer audacity to read the waves and the stars to connect two
It's
worlds.
beautiful.
But what really captivates me is what this newly mingled, highly resourceful population did once they firmly established themselves on Rapa Nui.
Right.
Because they initiated a period of monumental engineering that honestly still makes modern structural engineers scratch their heads.
We are talking, of course, about the Moai.
The famous monolithic statues.
Yes.
There are nearly 1,000 of them documented on the island, and the physical logistics of their creation are just staggering.
Truly mind-boggling.
About 95% of them were carved in a single massive volcanic crater called Rano Raraku.
And the material they used is called tuff. It's a compressed volcanic ash.
Right.
It's relatively soft when it's still attached to the bedrock, which made it workable for a society that didn't have metal tools.
They used hand chisels, right?
Yes, chisels made of a much harder volcanic rock called basalt. These chisels were called takoki.
Okay.
The carvers would methodically chip away at the bedrock, periodically splashing water on the tuff to soften it further.
But even with softened stone, the scale is just unbelievable. These statues have incredibly distinct features.
The heavy brows, the protruding lips.
Elongated ears, and oversized heads that make up roughly 3/8 of the entire mass.
It's a very specific stylistic choice.
And the largest one ever successfully transported and erected on a platform was named Paro. It was over 10 meters tall and weighed 82 tons.
To put that in perspective, 82 tons is roughly the weight of a fully loaded Boeing 737.
That is insane.
And they were moving this with human muscle and ropes.
Wow.
There's even an unfinished moai still lying in the quarry bedrock that would have been 21 meters tall and weighed an estimated 165 tons.
I always try to put myself in the mindset of the people investing this unimaginable amount of caloric energy and time into these projects.
It was a massive societal investment.
Why do this? It wasn't just to make the island look intimidating to passing canoes, right?
Not at all. If you look at the broader cultural ecosystem of Polynesia, ancestor veneration is a central pillar. On Rapa Nui, these statues had a deeply spiritual structural purpose within the society. They were Ariasi Ora, which translates roughly to living faces.
Living faces. That's beautiful.
They were the physical embodiments of deified ancestors, powerful chiefs, and the founders of specific lineages.
And they would place them on these massive, meticulously constructed stone platforms called ahu, which were usually situated right along the coastline.
Yes.
But the fascinating thing is almost none of them faced the ocean.
That's a very common misconception.
Yeah.
With the exception of one specific inland ahu, the Moai stood on the coast with their backs to the sea, facing inland, looking directly over the villages of their descendants.
Watching over them.
Exactly. They were believed to possess mana.
Mana.
Yeah. In Polynesian culture, mana is a complex concept. It's a spiritual life force, a magical power, an essence of authority and efficacy.
So the Moai were conduits for this mana.
Right. By facing the villages, the ancestors were projecting their protective power over the living, ensuring the fertility of the soil, the success of the harvests, and the general fortune of the clan.
And the statues weren't considered finished or alive just because they were carved and moved. There was a whole activation process.
Yes, a very specific ceremonial activation.
They would place these massive cylinders of red scoria stone on top of their heads. These were called pukao, and they were quarried from a completely different volcanic cone on the island called Punapau,
And the red stone represented a top knot of hair.
which was culturally significant because the head, and specifically the hair, was where a chief's mana was believed to be most highly concentrated.
Right. And the final, ultimate act of activation was the installation of the eyes.
Oh, right.
They carved deep eye sockets into the statues, but they remained empty until the moment of ceremonial activation.
When white coral and red scoria pupils were slotted into place.
Only then was the ancestor truly awake.
But this brings us to the mechanical mystery that has obsessed the world for centuries.
The transportation.
Yes. How do you transport an 82-ton piece of brittle volcanic ash kilometers across uneven, hilly terrain without wheels, without draft animals, and without snapping the statue in half.
For a very long time, the academic consensus rested on the sled and roller hypothesis.
Right.
The idea was that the islanders would lay the Moai flat on its back on a wooden sled, and then hundreds of people would drag that sled over a track of lubricated palm tree logs.
I've always struggled with the physics of that theory.
A lot of people have.
I mean, even if you have enough timber, volcanic tuff is relatively fragile under tension. If you lay a 30-foot stone statue flat on its back and subject it to the intense vibrations and uneven support of rolling logs, the sheer bending moment would likely cause the stone to crack right in the middle.
That's exactly the problem.
Plus, transitioning it from a flat position to a standing upright position on a tall stone platform without a crane seems impossibly dangerous.
Your skepticism is exactly what led archaeologists Carl Lipo and Terry Hunt to challenge the sled theory.
Oh.
They looked at the problem not just as archaeologists, but as engineers. And they proposed what is known as the walking theory.
Because the shape of the statues themselves holds the key, right?
Yes. What's fascinating here is they analyzed the morphology of the Moai that were found along the ancient transport roads.
The ones that never made it to their platforms.
Right. And they noticed highly specific, standardized design features that made zero sense if the statues were meant to be dragged flat.
Like what?
First, the statues have a center of mass that leans significantly forward.
So if you stood it upright, it would naturally want to fall on its face.
Precisely. And second, the base of the Moai isn't flat, it's D-shaped.
D-shaped.
The front edge is curved and the back is slightly flattened. Lipo and Hunt realized these statues were aerodynamically, or more accurately, gravitodynamically engineered to rock from side to side.
I love the metaphor you used when we were discussing this earlier. It's exactly like how a single person can move a massive, heavy refrigerator across a kitchen floor. You don't try to pick it up, you tilt it slightly, pivot it on one corner, and then pivot it on the other. You literally walk it.
It leverages the object's own mass and the physics of a pendulum. And to prove this wasn't just a theoretical model, Hunt and Lipo conducted an incredible experiment in Hawaii in 2012.
I've seen the footage of this.
It's amazing, right? They fabricated a mathematically precise 5-ton concrete replica of a Moai, incorporating that forward-leaning center of gravity and the D-shaped base.
And how many people did it take to move it?
Just 18 people.
Just 18, for 5 tons.
Yes. Divided into 3 teams holding thick ropes attached to the statue's head. One team on the left, one team on the right, and a smaller team in the back holding a tension line to prevent the forward-leaning statue from actually tipping over on its face.
So the left team pulls, the statue tilts and pivots forward on the curved edge of the D-shaped base. Then the right team pulls and it pivots forward on the other side.
It quite literally waddled down the road. They were able to move the 5-ton replica 100 meters in under an hour with relative ease.
That is brilliant.
And what's truly compelling is how perfectly this physical experiment aligns with the archaeological record back on Rapa Nui.
You mean the fallen statues on the rows?
Yes. There are dozens of Moai abandoned along the ancient transport routes leading from the quarry, and they didn't fall randomly.
What do you mean?
Lipo and Hunt documented that the statues abandoned on downhill slopes had almost all fallen flat on their faces. The ones on uphill slopes had fallen on their backs.
Oh, because if you lose control of a massive object that you are rocking upright, gravity dictates exactly how it's going to fall, depending on the incline.
Exactly.
If you're walking it downhill and the back team loses tension, it face plants. If you're going uphill and rock it too far backward, it falls on its back.
It perfectly matches the physics of walking.
That is just incredible. But let me ask you this. If a clan spends an entire year carving this masterpiece, and they get halfway to the village and it trips and face plants into the dirt, isn't that a catastrophic failure?
Well, we view it through a highly modern, goal-oriented lens, right? Where anything short of the final destination is a total failure.
Right.
But the indigenous perspective was entirely different. The Rapa Nui people didn't break these fallen statues apart to reuse the stone.
They didn't?
No, they didn't try to carve them down into smaller figures. They left them exactly where they fell, fully integrated into the sacred geography of the island.
Wow.
They gave them specific names. They served as boundary markers between clan territories, and their stories were woven into the oral history. The potential for a statue to fall was anticipated and culturally absorbed.
And I think my absolute favorite detail of this entire topic is what the Rapa Nui people themselves said.
About the statues walking.
Yes. When early European explorers arrived and asked the islanders, "How did your ancestors move these massive stones?" The islanders didn't describe sleds or rolling logs.
All right.
They consistently said that the statues, animated by the divine mana of the chiefs, walked to their destinations.
And for centuries, Western observers dismissed that as charming mythological folklore.
Right, just a fairy tale.
It turns out it was an entirely literal description of the engineering mechanics. The statues walked. Science just needed a few hundred years to catch up to the oral history.
That is just phenomenal.
It really is.
Before we move into the next phase of this island's history, which completely turns everything we just discussed on its head, I want to take a brief moment.
Absolutely.
If you are enjoying this deep dive, if this kind of measured, detailed exploration of historical enigmas helps you relax and wind down, please remember our partner, the YouTube channel Decoding the Dark.
They do fantastic work.
They really do. They specialize in creating immersive content that explores the unexplained and the shadows of the past. Go over to YouTube, search for Decoding the Dark, leave them a like, and subscribe to their channel. Let them be your guide into history's greatest mysteries.
Now, we need to address a massive contradiction.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if this society was capable of such brilliant, sustainable engineering and possessed such a deeply rooted spiritual structure, where does the story of them violently destroying your own island come from?
Right, we have to talk about the ecocide hypothesis. If anyone listening has read Jared Diamond's highly influential book, Collapse, you know this narrative.
It's very famous.
It has become the ultimate cautionary tale for modern environmentalism. The prevailing story has been that the islanders became so pathologically obsessed with building larger and larger moai that they committed ecological suicide.
The theory posits that they recklessly clear-cut every single tree on the island, including millions of massive Pasalococos palm trees, to use as timber for the sleds and rollers to move the statues.
And according to this narrative, the consequences were apocalyptic.
Oh, completely.
Without trees, the root systems died, leading to massive topsoil erosion. Without large timber, they could no longer build deep-water canoes, cutting off their main source of protein from pelagic fish and dolphins.
Which leads to famine.
Right. Crop yields plummeted, mass starvation set in, society fractured into brutal clan warfare, and eventually the population resorted to widespread cannibalism just to survive.
It's a very neat, very dramatic morality play. It casts the islanders as the reckless architects of their own doom. The problem is, modern science has completely dismantled almost every pillar of that story.
Let's start with the trees. Because it is a fact that the island used to be heavily forested, and when Europeans arrived, it was essentially a barren grassland.
Right, so the deforestation did happen.
But it wasn't a sudden, malicious clear-cutting by people obsessed with statues.
Exactly. To understand the deforestation, you have to look at the microscopic evidence. Paleobotanists, scientists who study ancient plant remains, analyzed the fossilized shells of the palm nuts that grew on the island during that era.
And what did they find?
Well, what they found completely shifted the blame. Almost every single fossilized seed shell showed the distinct, unmistakable gnaw marks of tiny teeth.
The Polynesian rat. Rattus excellens.
Exactly. When the first settlers arrived, they brought the rat intentionally as a food source.
Right.
But in an isolated island environment with absolutely no natural predators, no snakes, no large birds of prey, no mammals, rat populations explode exponentially.
I'm trying to picture how a rat causes an island-wide deforestation. Are we talking about swarms of them chewing down mature 50-foot palm trunks like beavers?
No, the mechanism's much more insidious. The rats eat the seeds.
Oh, okay.
The islanders were certainly cutting down mature trees to clear land for agriculture, for firewood, and yes, occasionally for moving things. But normally, a forest regenerates.
Because new seeds sprout.
Exactly. But on Rapa Nui, millions of rats were devouring the palm nuts before they could ever germinate. The islanders were cutting down the old growth, but the rats completely halted the forest's ability to replace it.
Wow.
It was a slow, multi-generational ecological shift, not a sudden, deliberate clear-cutting.
Okay, so the environment is fundamentally changing over decades. The tree canopy disappears. The fierce ocean winds are now whipping unimpeded across the island, drying out the soil and blowing away the fertile topland.
A huge ecological problem.
The sun is baking the earth. According to the old ecocide theory, this is the point where the crops fail and everybody starves.
Right.
But when archaeologists actually looked at the soil, they found something incredibly brilliant instead.
They found that the islanders didn't starve, they innovated.
How so?
They developed a highly sophisticated, incredibly labor-intensive agricultural technique known as lithic mulching, or surface rock gardening.
The mechanics of this blow my mind. Archaeologists mapped these vast areas. The islanders intentionally went out, broke up chunks of volcanic bedrock, and spread millions of rocks across thousands of acres of agricultural fields.
Yes.
They created these intricate veneer surfaces and stacked boulder gardens.
To someone walking past, it just looks like a chaotic field of rubble. But from an engineering standpoint, it is a precisely calibrated microclimate.
Break down the thermodynamics of that. How exactly does covering your soil in rocks help a plant grow in a harsh, windy environment?
Well, it functions on multiple interconnected levels. First, the physical presence of the rocks shields the earth from the direct baking sun, dramatically reducing soil moisture evaporation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, the rocks act as thousands of tiny windbreaks, altering the aerodynamic flow of the harsh, salty ocean breezes right at the surface level, which completely prevents the topsoil from blowing away.
It's like building millions of tiny open-air greenhouses out of shattered stone.
It is exactly like that. Furthermore, the rocks regulate temperature. They absorb the intense heat of the sun during the day, keeping the roots cooler, and then they slowly radiate that thermal energy back into the soil at night.
Buffering the plants against temperature drops.
Exactly. And perhaps most importantly, as these specific volcanic rocks slowly weather and break down, they leach vital mineral nutrients like phosphorus and potassium directly back into the dry, depleted soil.
It functions as a slow-release mineral fertilizer. They also built structures called manavai, right?
Yes, the circular stone gardens.
These beautifully stacked stone-walled enclosures, you can still see them today. They would dig down into the earth, build these high walls, and plant the most fragile, water-intensive crops, like taro and bananas, deep inside them where the wind couldn't touch them.
Right.
So the reality is, they didn't collapse from starvation. They engineered their way out of a climate crisis.
Which leaves us with a fascinating socio-political question.
Okay.
If they adapted so brilliantly and they had enough food to survive, why did European explorers in the 1700s find a society where the monumental Moai had been deliberately toppled over face down in the dirt?
Why abandon the ancestor cult if you aren't starving?
Exactly.
Well, because survival in a changed climate requires a completely different allocation of labor.
Exactly right.
If you are a commoner and you are spending 10 hours a day hauling rocks to build agricultural mulch just to ensure your family has sweet potatoes,
And the hereditary chief tells you to go spend the next 6 months dragging an 80-ton statue across the island to honor his grandfather.
eventually that social contract is going to break.
You've hit on the exact mechanism of the cultural shift. The society didn't undergo a biological collapse. It underwent a profound political revolution.
A revolution.
Yes. The ancestor cult, which relied on the absolute abundance of the early centuries to subsidize the massive labor required for the Moai, simply lost its relevance and its political capital. The old system failed to serve the new ecological reality.
And this transition period is known historically as the Hilly Moai, the overturning of the statues.
Right.
Between roughly 1500 and 1700 CE, the islanders systematically and seemingly deliberately toppled the Moai off their Ahu platforms.
And out of this revolution, a new power structure emerged. The traditional hereditary chiefs lost power to a new class of leaders, the Matatoa, who are essentially warrior leaders. And they brought with them a completely new religious paradigm, centered not on dead ancestors, but on a creator god named Make, and a fierce focus on fertility, resource control, and survival.
Which leads directly into one of the most extreme, cinematic, and intense political rituals in the history of human civilization.
The Birdman cult.
Or the Tangata Manu.
Yes, to understand the Birdman ritual, you first have to visualize the geography of where it took place.
Okay, paint a picture for us.
On the southwestern tip of the island is the Ranokau volcano. The crater is massive, holding a freshwater lake, but the seaward edge of this crater is a terrifying, sheer, 300-meter vertical cliff face that drops straight down into the crashing Pacific Ocean.
That is steep.
Very steep.
Wow.
And perched precariously right on the razor edge of that precipice is the ceremonial village of Orongo. It's built with these very low, sod-roofed stone houses designed specifically to withstand the gale force winds whipping over the cliff.
So every spring, as the migratory seabirds returned to the region, the leaders of the various Rapa Nui clans would gather at Orongo. But the chiefs themselves were too important, or perhaps too old, to compete in the ritual. Instead, each chief selected a young, elite athlete from their clan, a proxy warrior known as a Hopu Manu.
And the objective of this competition sounds deceptively simple.
Just procure the first bird egg of the season.
Exactly. But the physical execution required to get that egg is basically a lethal extreme sport. The Hoku Manu had to begin by climbing down that 300-meter vertical cliff face.
A cliff face battered by wind and ocean spray, where a single slip means falling onto jagged volcanic rocks.
Right, and once they survived the descent and hit the water, the real trial began. They had to swim over a kilometer out into the open, turbulent ocean.
And didn't they use these little floats?
Yes, they used small, tightly bound reed floats called pora to help them navigate the treacherous, swirling currents.
And waters that were heavily populated by sharks.
Exactly. Their destination was a tiny, jagged islet off the coast called Motu Nui, and getting there was only half the battle.
Because once they pulled themselves up onto the rocks of Motu Nui, the race suddenly turned into a psychological waiting game.
The Hopu Manu would shelter in small caves on the islet, surviving on whatever minimal rations they brought or what they could forage. And they waited.
For how long?
Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. The psychological tension must have been unbearable. They were waiting for the arrival of the Manutara, the sooty turn, and the laying of the very first egg of the spring.
You can imagine the paranoia, the exhaustion, skirmishes breaking out among the competitors in the dark caves.
Absolutely.
And then finally, a bird lays an egg. The first warrior to locate it would carefully secure the egg, scramble to the highest rocky outcropping on the islet, and shout across the roaring ocean back toward the towering cliffs of the main island.
Do you know what they shouted?
The traditional shout was, "Shave your head, you have the egg."
Yes. He was shouting that to his specific clan leader waiting at Orongo. But the Hopu Manu's job wasn't over.
He still had to get back.
He had to take this incredibly fragile egg, tie it securely to his forehead with a specialized woven band, dive back into the shark-infested waters, swim the kilometer back through the currents, and scale the 300-meter vertical cliff face without crushing the egg against the stone.
If he succeeds, he hands the egg to his clan leader, and that leader becomes the Tangata Manu, the birdman, for the entire year.
He becomes the supreme ruler of the island.
Now, I have to ask why. Why would a society, especially one recovering from ecological stress, entrust its entire political leadership and resource allocation to a wildly dangerous egg hunt?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a stroke of socio-ecological genius.
How so?
Consider the environment. They are trapped on a tiny, resource-scarce island. In that specific kind of pressure cooker environment, if you maintain a system of permanent hereditary leadership where one clan holds all the wealth and power indefinitely.
The marginalized clans eventually have nothing to lose.
Exactly. That inevitably leads to endless, bloody, total war of attrition.
Because the losers have no peaceful mechanism for ever gaining power. Violence becomes their only option.
Exactly. The Birdman competition acted as a high-stakes, institutionalized pressure release valve. It replaced endless, devastating warfare with a rotating, merit-based system of leadership.
It ensured that power, and more importantly, the rights to dictate the distribution of scarce resources, rotated among different clans over time.
Everyone had a chance to win next spring.
And the role of the winner, the Taigata Manu, was incredibly intense. He didn't just get a crown and a feast.
No.
The moment he received the egg, he became tapu, profoundly sacred, untouchable, and separated from the normal world.
He had to shave his head, paint his body red and white, and relocate to a specialized house where he lived in absolute total isolation for months.
He couldn't bathe. He couldn't interact with his family.
The prestige for his clan was absolute, but the personal, physical, and psychological sacrifice required of the leader was immense.
It was an incredible societal adaptation. They recognized that their environment had fundamentally changed, and they completely reinvented their political and religious structures to survive it.
It's a testament to their brilliance. But alongside their walking statues, their thermodynamic rock gardens, and their extreme birdman ritual, the Rapa Nui people held one more secret.
A secret that still sits silently in museum vaults today.
Yes, frustrating linguists around the globe.
Because no one alive can actually read it.
We are talking about the Rongorongo script.
It is one of the most enigmatic writing systems on Earth. There are only about 27 authentic objects bearing this script left in the entire world.
And tragically, none of them are actually on Easter Island anymore.
No, they are scattered in museums and private collections globally. They take the form of wooden tablets, staffs, and ornaments covered in these deeply incised, incredibly beautiful and complex glyphs.
Highly stylized human figures, birds, fish, plants, and geometric shapes.
And the mechanical process of reading it is fascinatingly unique. It is written in a style called reverse boustrophedon.
Right.
I tried to mimic the motion of reading this earlier, and it actually made me dizzy. Explain how reverse boustrophedon physically works.
So imagine holding a rectangular wooden tablet in your hands. You start at the bottom left corner and read the first line of glyphs from left to right.
Okay.
But when you reach the end of the line, you don't just drop your eyes down to the next line like reading a modern book. The next line of glyphs is carved upside down and backwards.
Wait, really?
Yes. So to read it, you have to physically rotate the entire wooden board 180 degrees. Then you read the new line from left to right.
You are constantly flipping the tablet end over end as you read your way up the wood.
It is mesmerizing to visualize a historian or priest chanting while rapidly spinning this wooden board in their hands.
But for over a century, the academic world has been locked in a massive debate over what rongorongo actually is.
Yes. Is it true writing, representing a spoken language with syntax and grammar?
Or is it a proto-writing system, just a series of mnemonic memory aids like pictorial bullet points to remind a storyteller of the sequence of a myth?
And perhaps the most heated debate. Did the islanders invent it themselves from scratch? Or did they just see European explorers writing on paper in the 1700s and decide to mimic the concept?
The idea that it was merely mimicry of European writing was a dominant theory for a long time.
Largely driven by Eurocentric biases that assumed an isolated indigenous population wouldn't invent writing independently.
But that entire debate was completely turned on its head just recently, in 2024.
This is the study from the University of Bologna.
Yes, a team led by Silvia Ferrara, who is a philologist, meaning she specializes in the historical development of languages and the decipherment of ancient texts, conducted a groundbreaking radiocarbon dating study.
Right.
They managed to test 4 rongorongo tablets that are currently held in a secure archive by a congregation of Catholic nuns in Rome.
Now, carbon dating wood that is covered in priceless carvings is tricky, right? You can't exactly chop off a chunk of it.
No, they use a highly precise technique called accelerator mass spectrometry, or AMS. It requires only a microscopic sample of the material, barely a splinter, to count the carbon-14 isotopes and determine the age of the wood.
And what did they find?
When they tested the 4 tablets, 3 of them returned dates from the 18th or 19th centuries. That was expected, as that aligns with the period of heavy European contact.
Right.
But the 4th piece, known in the academic catalog as Tablet D, returned an impossible date.
How impossible?
The radiocarbon dating proved, with high confidence, that the tree used to make Tablet D was cut down between 1493 and 1509 CE.
1493. That is more than 2 centuries before the very first European ship, commanded by the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, ever spotted the island in 1722.
Precisely. And there are layers to this evidence. The wood of Tablet D isn't even a native Rapa Nui tree species.
Really?
Botanical analysis showed it was a species of podocarp that likely grew in Southeast Africa or Madagascar, floated across the oceans, and washed ashore on Rapa Nui as driftwood.
Wow. Wood was so incredibly scarce on the deforested island that a piece of driftwood was a divine gift.
The islanders carved the sacred script into it, and furthermore, the tablet has deep notches cut into its sides, indicating that long after it was used as a sacred text, it was repurposed by a later generation as a spool for winding heavy fishing line.
So it was sacred, and then it became utilitarian. But stepping back, what does that 1493 date actually prove about the origin of the script?
It provides the most compelling, empirically dated evidence ever found that rongorongo is an independent invention of writing.
Which is incredibly rare.
Historically, the invention of writing from absolute scratch, without outside influence, is one of the rarest achievements in human history.
We know it happened in Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, in China, and in Mesoamerica.
Finding a potentially independent genesis of writing on a tiny, isolated speck in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is a monumental anthropological discovery.
The glyphs look absolutely nothing like European letters.
The mechanics of reading it are entirely unique. It was theirs, born completely of their own isolated genius.
Knowing that they invented it independently makes the history of our attempts to translate it so incredibly tragic.
It really does. I was reading the accounts of Bishop Florentine Johnson in Tahiti in the late 1860s. He acquired several tablets and was desperate to decipher them.
And he found someone to help him.
He found a Rapa Nui laborer working on a plantation named Metero, who confidently claimed he had been educated in the script and could read the tablets.
Johnson thought he had found his Rosetta Stone.
He did. He sat Metoro down, handed him a tablet, and Metoro began chanting beautifully. The bishop meticulously recorded hundreds of pages of phonetics, believing he was capturing the grammar and syntax of the ancients.
But when modern linguists analyzed the bishop's exhaustive notes, they realized the heartbreaking truth.
And Metro wasn't reading.
He was just looking at the pictures and chanting completely nonsensical descriptions of what they visually looked like.
Like, there is a bird. The bird is next to a man. The man holds a club.
He was ignoring the reverse boustrophedon orientation, reading off the edges. He had absolutely no idea what the language actually was. He was just performing for the bishop.
The actual semantic meaning of the script, the grammar, the history recorded on those boards, had already been violently erased from the world by the time Jocelyn tried to save it.
Which brings us to the most painful, but absolutely necessary part of this deep dive.
How did a culture, this brilliant, this incredibly resilient a culture that navigated the largest ocean, engineered thermodynamic agriculture, and invented their own written language, lose its voice, its history, and so much of its population?
It wasn't an ecocide. It wasn't the trees, and it wasn't the rats.
No.
The true collapse of Rapa Nui came entirely from the outside world. It was a collapse driven by colonial contact, exploitation, and disease.
The timeline of contact is devastating. It starts when Jacob Roggeveen arrives on Easter Sunday in 1722, and almost immediately upon landing, the dynamic is set.
His heavily armed men get nervous around the large, excited crowds of curious islanders pressing in on them.
And they open fire, killing a dozen unarmed people within hours of first contact.
That violence was a harbinger. But the truly catastrophic blow, the event that fractured the spine of the Rapa Nui civilization, occurred in 1862.
It was a series of Peruvian slave raids.
A horrific, state-sanctioned practice known colloquially as blackbirding.
Armed ships arrived from South America. They didn't come to trade, they came to harvest human beings. They violently kidnapped an estimated 1,500 Rapa Nui people.
That was potentially a third of the entire living population at the time.
And they didn't just take indiscriminately.
They specifically targeted the leadership. They captured the island's paramount chief, the royal family, the educated elite, and the priests.
The captives were taken to Peru to be sold essentially as slaves, forced into indentured servitude to harvest toxic guano deposits on offshore islands or work on brutal agricultural plantations.
Most of those 1,500 people died in completely horrifying, degrading conditions within a year.
Eventually, the Bishop of Tahiti and the French government raised a massive international outcry, and the Peruvian government was forced to halt the practice and repatriate the survivors.
But out of the 1,500 taken, only a few dozen actually survived the journey back to the island.
And when they returned, the nightmare compounded.
Because the returning survivors didn't just bring the trauma of enslavement, they brought smallpox.
The epidemic swept through the remaining population, who had absolutely no immunological defense against European pathogens. The death toll was staggering.
And that epidemic was closely followed by tuberculosis, which was inadvertently introduced by well-meaning but ultimately destructive foreign missionaries like Eugenie Rod, who arrived shortly after to convert the traumatized survivors to Christianity.
The demographic collapse is one of the most severe recorded in modern history. Consider this statistic. From a pre-contact population that numbered in the many thousands, by the year 1877, census takers recorded exactly 111 native Rapa Nui inhabitants left on the entire island.
111 people. And among the thousands who perished in the slave raids and the epidemics were the Tumu Iwi Atua. These were the highly specialized experts.
The keepers of the culture.
Exactly. The masters of the complex genealogy, the oral historians, and crucially, they were the only people educated to read and write the Rongorongo script.
When the Tumu Iwi Atua died, the memory of the island's deep history, the key to its written language, went into the earth with them.
It wasn't just a loss of life. It was a cultural lobotomy inflicted by the outside world.
As much as we love to explore historical mysteries and marvel at the walking statues and undeciphered codes, it is so vital to remember the real human cost of this history.
We have to look at the dark shadows of exploitation to fully understand the light of their survival.
These were real people whose civilization and heritage were violently stolen from them.
Which is exactly why the final piece of our deep dive today is so important. It brings us out of the historical darkness and into a narrative of modern healing, of ethical accountability, and of beginning to right the profound wrongs of that era.
This is a story of incredible archival detective work that just culminated in November 2024. Columbia University in New York officially repatriated the ancestral remains of a Rapa Nui individual back to the island.
The process of how this repatriation actually happened is a fascinating look into how modern institutions have to dig through their own messy, often unethical histories.
It initiated when Father Francisco Naho, a Catholic priest of Rapa Nui descent who acts as a representative for the island's Council of Elders, contacted Columbia University.
Right.
He had a very vague, old report suggesting that a cranium had been taken from an Ahu burial site on the island in December 1916 by a crew member of an American scientific research vessel called the Carnegie.
But when Father Francisco reached out, Columbia's anthropology department couldn't find any reference to it in their immediate catalogs. It was a ghost in the system.
Because the records from the early 20th century were notoriously disorganized, and the way museums classified human remains back then was deeply flawed.
This is where the interdisciplinary archival work became crucial. Professor Zoe Crossland in the anthropology department realized she needed specialized help, so she reached out to Kevin Schlottman, the head of archives processing at Columbia's Rare Book and Manuscript Library.
Schlottman started pulling thread after thread.
Father Francisco had mentioned a name, a sailor supposedly named Norman Meisinger, who had taken the skull.
Schlottman cross-referenced this with the actual maritime logs of the Carnegie expedition from 1916. He realized the name had been phonetically misspelled in the old reports. The sailor's actual name was Norman Meisenhelter.
Once he had the correct spelling, it opened up a new avenue. He tracked the name through decades of academic literature, and he eventually stumbled upon a highly obscure German-language academic article published in 1934 by a former Columbia physical anthropology professor named Bruno Oedeking.
And right there, in the very first paragraph of the German text, Oedeking explicitly stated that Columbia University had received a skull from Easter Island as a gift in 1930.
The donor was Norman Meisenhelter, who explicitly noted he had taken it from the island in 1916.
That 1934 German paper was The Smoking Gun, and crucially, it included detailed photographs and craniometric measurements of the skull.
Armed with that data, Professor Jill Shapiro, an expert in osteology, began physically searching the university's collections. She eventually located the specific cranium.
But the reason it was so hard to find is incredibly telling about the history of science. It wasn't in the anthropology department.
No, it was sitting unidentified in a vault maintained by the Ecology, Evolution, and Environmental Biology department.
Because in the early 20th century, indigenous human remains were often classified and stored alongside animal specimens and biological curiosities, rather than being treated with the reverence of human ancestors.
Exactly. Finding it was a triumph of archival research, but it triggered a complex legal and ethical situation.
Right.
You see, within the United States, institutions are bound by NAGPR, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. NAGPR legally mandates the return of Native American remains to federally recognized tribes.
But Rapa Nui is an overseas territory of Chile. It does not fall under U.S. federal jurisdiction.
From a strictly legal standpoint, Columbia University was under no binding federal obligation to return the remains. They could have legally kept it in a box forever.
But the ethical landscape of archaeology has fundamentally shifted. Rather than relying on technical legal loopholes, Columbia was guided by the moral imperatives outlined in UNDRP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
UNDRP explicitly identifies the repatriation of ancestral remains as a fundamental human right, regardless of international borders.
The university's legal counsel, the anthropology department, and the Chilean government worked collaboratively for months to navigate the incredibly complex international customs logistics required to move human remains across borders.
They chose to recognize the moral sovereignty of the Rapa Nui people over their own ancestors.
And the culmination of all this work happened on December 17, 2024. After more than a century locked in a drawer thousands of miles away, the Iwi Tupuna, the bones of the ancestor, were flown the final 3,700 kilometers back across the Pacific.
They were received on the tarmac by a Rapa Nui delegation, who welcomed the ancestor home with traditional chants and reverence.
A piece of the island, stolen during its most vulnerable and darkest era, was finally returned to the earth.
It is a profound moment of restorative justice. It signals that the era of Western academic institutions treating indigenous ancestors as mere scientific curiosities, objects to be measured and hoarded, is actively coming to an end. It is about restoring fundamental human dignity.
It brings us full circle to how we started this entire journey. We began by talking about stepping off the map into the dark, murky waters of history and examining the myths we've been told.
But as we've untangled those myths, a completely different, incredibly bright picture has emerged.
The real, enduring mystery of Easter Island isn't a story of how they failed. It isn't a cautionary tale of reckless ecocide or self-destruction.
The true marvel, the reality that science is finally revealing, is how they managed to survive so brilliantly in utter, unimaginable isolation.
They navigated the largest ocean on Earth using the stars. They engineered aerodynamically precise walking statues.
When the climate shifted and the trees died, they built millions of microclimates out of shattered rocks to ensure their children wouldn't starve.
They reinvented their entire political system, replacing bloody warfare with an athletic leap off a 300-meter cliff, and they invented their own written language from scratch on a tiny speck of volcanic ash.
They are the ultimate testament to the adaptability and resilience of the human mind.
And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over in the quiet of your evening as you wind down and let the complexities of your own day drift away.
If this incredibly isolated culture could overcome profound ecological shifts, adapt their entire societal structure, and engineer survival out of harsh winds and barren rocks,
what does their resilience teach us about our own capacity to adapt to the massive global challenges we face today? We certainly aren't as physically isolated as they were, but when you zoom out far enough, we are all just sharing one slightly larger island floating in the stars.
it's a beautiful perspective. And it makes you wonder, somewhere out there, perhaps buried deep in the sand or hidden in the mislabeled box of a forgotten archive, is there another piece of driftwood waiting to finally speak to us?
A wonderful, lingering question to end on. Thank you so much for taking this time to slow down, to relax, and to wind down with us today. We deeply appreciate you sharing this quiet space with us.
One last time, if you enjoyed this journey into the shadows and light of the past, please check out our partner, Decoding the Dark, on YouTube.
Leave a like, subscribe to their channel, and support their ongoing exploration of history's greatest mysteries.
It has been an absolute pleasure to unpack this deep dive with you.
Have a peaceful night or a calm, restful remainder of your day. Take care of yourself, and we will see you next time.